that has to be looked at in that. So could you maybe just elaborate just a bit more, understanding it's primarily recreational, but that flooding has to be something that you think about? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the point was that if you look at the basins that we work in, and you think about, in some ways, people, we live in a valley, but you don't see the valley when you sit in Midland. There's not big, huge mountains and stuff, and so there's a lot of capacity for water to flood, but it's really low capacity. So the idea that that whether the flood's in or not, that the water that goes through this valley is going to end up in the Midland no matter what. And so the big thing you don't want to do is have the dam fail. Now, the second question is could you build the dams to be flood controlled? If you were going to go spend, the 200 million, 250 to 350 on these, there's not enough benefit to do it. You'd be better off spending the money somewhere else for flood control. There's just simply not. There's maybe 1/10 the capacity in these basins if they were empty that would have, that would meet the requirement for flood control. So in other words, the water is going to come down here whether the dams are not in the Midland. So we have to manage the strategy of flood mitigation in Midland differently, and we have to do it strategically. And so the point is that the Army Corps of Engineers is not going to come in here and say, hey, this is a great place to solve that problem. What we recognize here is that we can manage these dams better for the 100 and 200 and maybe even 300 or 400 year flood, but you can't manage it for 1,000 year, 2,000 year flood, because the dams will be underwater just like the rest of the city. So somewhere we have to kind of pick the right economic model to work on. And so it's kind of like a bathtub, right? I mean, you put water in and water comes out. When the dams are there, they come in and come out about the same rate. When the dams are not there, they come in and come out the same rate. The only way you can control it is you can bring the water down, but that may bring in, that water will fill up in literally several hours, and we can see that as these issues come up. So it's more about making sure the dams don't fail and being responsive, having more systems on there, and yes, being proactive to lower the dams. But these dams didn't have enough capacity, and so they created other issues beyond just the flooding. And so that's the thing we have to work on. So, there'll be a lot of study on this and structure. And one of the things we're going to do, if you can imagine, you say, well, here's a 300-year flood, and when we model it, we will have what they call inundation maps that show, well, what gets flooded at 100-year floods with the dam and without the dam. And then can the dam control any of that? Those are the things we would lack. There's an argument that hey, if we were proactive in 14 days ahead, could we have lowered all that water and moved it down? Maybe we could, and that's one of the things we'll look at. But I would say it will delay it for a day. I mean, we've seen these dams fill up very quickly. There's just not enough capacity in them to make that big a difference. So we're worried about flood control, but it's got to be a strategic thing. If these dams can help. But if you think about 40% and they have maybe 10%, maybe they can help 4% of the flood control. They can't help, so if they only present 40% of the water and they have maybe 10% capacity of the water going down to kind of dampen it, it may help by 4 or 5%. It won't help by 50%. You know what I'm saying? So it's just the math of how much water we have coming in. There's 30 or 40 rivers coming into these 4 major rivers, and that's one of the challenges.
Thank you. Another question was, will the new dam flow be the run of the river?
Legally, the dams are set at a lake with plus or minus, 8 inches roughly, depends on the lake. But and if you had hydropower, the reason it didn't run the river, you call it called peaking. The hydro operator would want to run it, raise the water high, and then at the right rate levels, run it low. Well, we don't have to change the lake levels, but we're not going to run around changing gauge so I would say the rivers would be more oriented to run of the river, keeping them consistent. because why would we run around in Pekin if there's no hydropower? And second of all, it's more environmentally, I would say, good to do. We don't have to change the lake levels, we just have to run them that way. That's a different discussion. That's whether you raise the levers artificially during the day to generate power is where run of the river gets in discussion. The other one is seasonal, is that we lower the dams in the season to really manage the ice flow. I mean, we're dealing with that now. Spring's going through, ice is falling through. We've got to get them through the waterways. So this helps manage the ice flow and a little bit of management by having it lower.
And there was a question on when you talked about the gauges. What will the gauges define, and will it even the flow between the dams?
No, so one of the things that the gauges do is it helps in modeling. So we don't have, like the radar systems north of these systems barely gets here. So we need to have more on the ground things to better model and understand the dams, and we need better warning systems, So what is the predictive nature of the dams? Our measurement basic, and I'm oversimplifying it, we get from NOAA and we look at the gauge at the end of the system. The more we know where it is, the more we can understand and model where we should put other mitigants, like diverting water somewhere else. There's ways you mitigate floods. You don't build in flood areas once you get a model right. You look at diversion models to move them away, and you look at faster response to kind of get people out of the way on these very major dams and even get property out of the way. So those are the things that we have to work on. I'm not saying, I'm trying to do this as a guided thing. It's like, hey, we have never really strategically looked at these dams. So we're doing a lot of stuff on sewers and structures, but we sit at the base of these dams and we should know more about them. And that's kind of the key thing, both operationally and to feed into our modeling and future, because the weather pattern is changing, and you can't have 3 floods in 30 years that would have a 30% probability in 50 years and believe those frequencies are right. So we have to reset our thinking about what the frequencies are and how we're going to manage through it. And that the first thing these gauges do is help.
That's what that guy told me.
And
they don't want the Corps of Engineers
to give us
too
more
tiny.
information as we go forward.
Thank you. And you touched on this at the end, Dave, and that was just the affordability question for many of those that live in this area. And could you, and you, again, you talked a bit about that, but as residents of on the former lakes are concerned about that, what thoughts have you had to address some of the affordability concerns?
Well, so look, so the structure, and this is, I think, so I mean, first of all, explain the law quickly, because these are special assessment districts, so they're not taxing authorities. They're a special assessment district. They're under the control of the county. We're the delegated authority to set the roles and stuff, but they have to approve it. But the point is, it's based on benefit. So so if you have a $500,000 house next to a $100,000 house, on taxation they would pay different in terms of value. On an assessment like a road or a drain, they get equal benefit, and so they're not based on value. So in a community like this, in a community of all these lake communities where the value of the lake, this water was free, you had a variety of people that could afford to do this over the generations, and there's a huge difference in income across these lakes. So when you throw a special assessment district on it doesn't work for everybody if it's too high. And so when you take a big number and the only mechanism you have to charge is this, it's painful. And so we are trying to offset that. Now, the 2 ways to offset it is figure out how to do it lower, figure out other ways and bring other funders in, and work through it. I think as we go forward, we're going to find that, first of all, no matter how perfect we are, I get there's some people are going to be, not going to be able to afford it. So the first thing we have to do is recognize there's by lake, it's a different problem. Okay, so Secord Lake has a different affordability structure than Sanford, but it has a lower cost rate too. So we feel like we can get an special assessment district in and working on that. And Sanford is a unique one in that it has the average income in Midland is 60,000. Okay, the average value on those homes on the lake are 250,000. In Gladwin, it's 40,000 on the average home on Wixom Lake is 120,000. So Wixom Lake has a real big challenge because it's more cost. There's 2 dams, and we have to work on that. And to me, even when we get it all done and say this is the number, then you have to look at, well, what's the appetite for the community? That's why the survey. And then how do we deal with people that are going to be needing with help? We just can't say, hey, that's the number, live with it. So we'll have to look at ways to either lower the total number or look at how we manage people, especially people that are homesteaded, and that's their primary help. We'll have to look at things to look. We're talking about, do we put endowments in? Do we look at state things to kind of help people manage if they're truly economically challenged in it? And that's part of the whole discussion is it feasible for the community? And then how do you manage the individual? And what's been a big issue here, and I'm sorry, this is like the big issue, is we're just trying to give the numbers as best we have as we go forward. And the numbers are getting better because we're learning more. But we can't hide the number, because if we just say it's all going to be better, we can't surprise people at the end. So we're trying to have this dialogue as we go through.
Appreciate that, and thank you. I know we're really at the end of our time, and I have a few concluding things. There were a lot of things we didn't get to, so we will get those to you, Dave, so that you can, if there are other questions that you can, because I know there was quite a bit in the chat, that you can address some of those. But thank you. Thanks for coming, for sharing this information, for addressing. I know these are difficult, discussion subjects, the work that you're doing. So,
No, I appreciate it, Sharon. I see that we have like 44 questions, so I will. But as you send them to, we'll commit to bringing them through, and I'm sure we have some questions are pretty easy to answer, and some might be challenging. But we'll make sure we get through them and get a response back.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for joining today. And as we close, I did want to just remind everyone that as individuals are still seeking assistance to help with recovery from the flood, we encourage them to call 211, reliefmidland.org. Of course, we would encourage them, if they're not already connected with our disaster case managers, I know some of whom are on the call with us today, we very much encourage you to connect with them. And actually, if one of our disaster case managers wouldn't mind putting the phone number there so folks have it and they could write it down very easily, that would be wonderful. And I wanted just to mention that we encourage you to look at previous session topics as well for those that you might want to learn more about. Our next flood recovery session call is going to be on April 8th, and it will focus on neighbors helping neighbors. So telling some stories of some of the amazing things that happen and continue to happen in our community as we work to help one another recover. And then I will mention that May's session will look at mental well-being, because we know that as we come into May, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. And I know that's a very difficult time. So we are going to have speakers looking at mental well-being and just self-care, things that might be helpful for you or for others, as we come up on the 1-year anniversary. As always, we ask you to register in advance for these, and we will get the Zoom link to you. So thank you all for joining us today for this flood recovery session call. Thanks to our speaker, Dave Kepler from the Four Lakes Task Force, for presenting information to the group. And again, any sessions that you would like to, topics that you would like to see handled in these sessions, please let us know. I know some of the things that we've done have come from suggestions from the group, as we looked at city and county housing codes, as we talked about mental well-being, as we looked at FEMA, so suggestions that many of you had on topics that you would like to see us cover. So again, thank you for joining us. And I do see that we have two of our case managers, thank you, disaster case managers, put the phone number for the flood recovery line, which is, again, I know it's easier to write it down, but that 989-374-8000 number. So I encourage you to reach out there as well. So thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.